conduct roll call? Oh, it's on, it's on, it's on, yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon. I would like to announce that we are live streaming this meeting on the county's YouTube channel. We also have our new sound system in place, and I think all the members of our committee have given some brief instruction on how to use it. But just as a reminder, when you need to speak, you just press your button and the base will light up green. Press it again to mute. And you can move this, it's wireless, you can move it so to adjust to your speaking level. Thank you. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Okay.
We can't hear Ace, but we can hear you.
Okay. Gonna have to speak up.
Sound system's working.
So I will conduct roll. Chair Barish. Vice Chair Muschetti.
Present.
Sheriff Allman.
Here.
Member Angelo.
Here.
Member Weir.
Here.
Member McGordy.
Present.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Riley.
Here.
Member Myrtle.
Here.
Member Diamond.
Here.
And Member Liberty is absent by prearrangement.
Are there any members of the public that would like to participate in, that would like to participate in public expression? Please step up and state your name.
I want to begin by thanking you for the opportunity to speak today.
Could I have you state your name?
My name is Bill Barksdale. That's in my remarks, though, so don't mix me up. Thank you. As someone who served on many boards, including myself, at the county level, I respect each of you for your generous service here. My name is Bill Barksdale. I served as the former chairman of the County Assessment Appeals Board, the president of the Mendocino County Board of Realtors and Multiple Listing Service, where I oversaw the transition from a paper-based data system to a computer-based system, and I oversaw the training of the membership in the use of computer data systems. I've also served on other boards. I understand decision-making and effective leadership. I recently attended a meeting in Willits of very concerned citizens, voters, and taxpayers. Our meeting included a member of the Howard Foundation, a prominent physician familiar with Measure B issues, as well as a retired project manager and others. I've studied much of the Kemper Report 2000 CRF Crisis Residential Facility and CSU Crisis Stabilization Unit. The report also said that adequate funding had not been identified as of the time of the 2018 report was compiled. It's my understanding that property at 8207 East Road in Redwood Valley was acquired by the county as a training facility with no treatment component. This appears to be a high-maintenance country club-like property, and if it's been acquired as a component of this program, I caution that all facets of ongoing expense be included in a realistic budget that reaches into the future at least 10 years. An economical training facility could be a classroom or two and on-the-job training. The old Howard Hospital has been much discussed as a possible facility that would serve the needs for both CRF and CSU. Although this facility may not be perfect, I will state the obvious, that attempting to build from scratch a perceived perfect facility which does not have adequate funding available, per my understanding, seems like a poor idea. New construction always involves cost overruns and unexpected costs. The Howard Hospital facility can be acquired for approximately $2 million. This is a bargain price. It was a fully operational hospital a few years ago, has been maintained, and is virtually adequate now for CRF and CSU uses.
Mr. Barksdale, we're usually limited to 3 minutes, so could I have you?
May I please indulge me for a moment?
Okay.
To finish my remarks. I've made it very organized. This is not the appropriate for acute psychiatric crisis care, the poorly named PUF unit. The acute care that acute care will have to be addressed in a separate program. However, by addressing intervention sooner with a crisis residential facility and crisis stabilization unit, the impact on the county jail facility will likely be much reduced, thereby saving the county considerable expense by addressing the needs of people experiencing lower levels of mental health issues. The Howard facility, although not perfect, will offer a very viable, affordable option to much more expensive imprisonment with no treatment.
Mr.
Or-
Barksdale, I'm going to have to ask you to bring it to a close.
Okay, then I'm sorry that my remarks are not
Please send us
enough
a
here.
please send us a written communication, and we will consider all.
I do that, but I feel cheated as a taxpayer and a voter.
Chair, you have two things up. Three. Oh, I'm sorry, not mine. I have one up. And very rarely do we respond to open community sessions, but I thank you very much. And as a resident of Willits, I'm very appreciative that, and you should know that as far as I know, and as far as I remember, you're the first person from Willits who has publicly spoken in support of this. And I would encourage you to also make sure that the city council of Willits knows what your remarks are, because this is something that we've talked about, and we've certainly felt quite a bit of pressure from the city government of Willits, contrary to what you said. However, as the chair said, your remarks, if you can submit what you have to us today, copies will be made and given to every member of our committee.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Let's see. We have, please.
Thank you, John McCallan, Board of Supervisors, public comment. The Board of Supervisors met yesterday and did approve your recommendation for $30,000 to hire a grant writer to ideally assist in securing funds needed to carry out the mission of the Mental Health Treatment Act. Did approve $50,000 to begin necessary modifications to the training center, and did approve up to $35,000 for acquisition of a sound system. However, from general fund, the board didn't believe that was an appropriate expenditure to come out of the Measure B funds. It should come out of the county funds. It's our responsibility to provide appropriate equipment for public meetings. During the report by Dr. Barish, we also had some discussion of various issues, and one suggestion that came up was it would probably be desirable to have a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Measure B committee. And the board did support that idea. Hopefully this committee will. And it's probably would be rushing things to try and pull it together by December, but certainly shortly after the first of the year, it would probably be beneficial to have a joint meeting of all concerned. And of course, there is the ongoing discussion of, despite doubts about do we have enough money to do everything we want to do, and no, we don't, but there is a lot of interest in moving forward with services, and maybe not specifically to that point exactly, but one thing that Sheriff Allman said yesterday, if I can paraphrase, was, well, if we try something and it doesn't work, we can try something else. So meanwhile, we do have significant funding accruing. So, you know, I do welcome this committee considering, is there, you know, a level of services that we could move forward with while we're figuring out what are all these major facilities going to cost and how will we staff them. I think we can, it doesn't have to be either or. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCallan. Yes, Jed.
I have a question, if I could ask. One, I want to just appreciate the county and the board for approving the sound system, which, yeah, which has been necessary for a long time. And I think as a community board that is asking for public input, we must allow the public to hear what we're saying, or it's useless. So my question was, since we at our last meeting had approved at least our desire that a sound system be available and that the Measure B committee was recommend, if we needed to take it out of our funds, we would, but the decision was to take it out of the general fund, if I understand it. And I've been asked by the public, what exactly does the sound, did it cost? You know, there was a range, and what all does it do? Because I think people that are sitting in here know that they can hear better, but I think it does other things as well, and there's an added benefit of what the sound system can do. So.
Janelle Rao, Deputy CEO. As your clerk announced, you are being live streamed, and that is one of the functions of the sound system and having that capability. Prior to this, the video quality didn't render it publishable live because of the audio and the lack of the audio. This will also, it's a portable system, so you'll be able to take this to any meeting location, and not just this board. The benefit of the county actually acquiring it is that we can use it universally for any of our boards, committees, or commissions. And this committee, however, does differ in that there was direction that it be live streamed. And for other boards, committees, or commissions, you may be meeting in a room that may not have the same volume of folks participating, and also the same where you have quite a large member composition. So yes, you are being live streamed. That is one of the additional enhancements to this as well.
Could you say what that means for people that
Live
don't
streaming.
know, and
Yes,
where
sorry.
people can hear it if they want to?
Exactly.
hear
So
what
there
this
is a website, there's a YouTube site. We'll make sure, I believe it's on the mental health, the Measure B Oversight Committee's website, where the location of that is and how you can get to it. So what that is the video, right now you're being live broadcasted, and anyone in the public that has accessibility via the internet can be watching. There was some discussion and possible mention about public participation via that, and that is something that we've researched even from our board level, and how one may be able to participate via the internet and that component. So live streaming means you're live and it's being broadcast. YouTube, every one of your videos has been available subsequent and following your meetings, but it required a great deal of county staff time to really go in and edit the quality of the video, and probably hours of time for each meeting depending. So that will no longer be necessary. Hope that helps.
I would like to move to Member Weir. Oh. To give the, oh, I'm sorry.
That's right. Hi, my name is Sherry Ebiam. I'm a former Director of Business Services with a school district. And one of the tasks I undertook in that position was building a new elementary school. And when we undertook a project as large as that, we had a list of priorities that we established. When there's a limited amount of money, we had to decide what was most important, because some things just couldn't be had. And I wondered if the Measure B committee has some list like that. Have you created that? Because I was surprised to see the purchase of a mental health facility right off the mental health training facility / sheriff's substation right off the get-go. I guess because my belief is, as a citizen, that the more important facilities to fund and build would be the psychiatric health facility, the crisis residential facility, and the crisis stabilization unit. So it kind of raised a red flag for me about that. And you know, and thank goodness the 35,000 for the sound system didn't come out of Measure B, because that's how money gets eaten up really, really quickly. So that's one of my comments I wanted to make. And the other piece related to that, though, was the 70-30 breakdown in funding for that property that was purchased, because, and I wondered how that breakdown was arrived at. Whether or not it's the belief that 70% of the use of that facility will in fact be used for mental health trainings. Along with that is the savings that the county will incur by not having to rent facilities. Kemper report clearly stated it's important to not to supplant costs in the budget, but to support the costs. So will those savings for the rental, will the savings to the sheriff's department once these other facilities are open, will that savings be geared toward future mental health related operations, so that the supplanting doesn't free up that money in the general fund? And lastly, I've got 18 seconds left. Lastly is about the salary for the program director, 84,000, I understand. I did a quick survey went through the adopted budget and looked at step 1 and 3 for different director positions with commensurate budgets that they oversee. And most of them for step 3 were in the range of $100,000, $110,000. This salary that's offered, $84,000 at 22,080 hours, full-time position for a year, comes out to about $40 an hour to oversee a budget that will ultimately be up to $38 million. So I wondered about that also. My time's up. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments? Yes, Jed, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of clarifications that might be helpful for a number of things that were asked from the community. The sheriff can help me, or any of the other committee, if I've got this wrong. But my understanding was that in the original legislation that was passed by the voters, a training facility was built into that, so that when it was passed, that was part of what the voters were voting for, in addition to other mental health facilities. And again, it's my remembrance that when the Kemper report, which we asked to be done subsequent to our forming this committee, was turned into us, they had left out the training facility in the budget. Did I recall that accurately? And so it gave the impression, I think, to people that read that report, that the training was not a part of the original legislation, or was not a priority that the voters wanted and that we had voted on when we decided to spend money on this. And there are other priorities that we have subsequently adopted that have to do with a residential facility and the facilities of shorter-term crisis intervention. But I think we need to at least be made aware that that was a mistake of the report, not a something that was left out of the legislation.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Beth Rydell. I live outside of Willits, about a little less than a mile. And it's very hard going to city council meetings because I'm really not considered very well, since I'm not a voter in my own town that I actually use. I thank the Board of Soups for paying for this sound system, and it makes total sense that it can be used by many, many organizations and not paid through our tax money for this. I'm also, I will try to work more with my city council, which isn't my city council, but working on, I really believe that saving money by using Howard Hospital for not for a puff unit, but for virtually everything else, makes total sense. It's easier to get through for much of the county. I know that Highway 253, my experience is that it's often, in the winter times, you're not always positive how passable that will be. Coming out 20, even from the coast, makes more sense, and most people tend to use that unless they're down in Point Arena. And Laytonville and Covelo are very much a part of our area. I do have friends who've had family members that do have mental health problems, and getting down and back from Ukiah, often it doesn't work unless they can find somebody to actually drive this person, because we don't have transportation that works for that. So I really hope that you will look very seriously at using the Old Howard Hospital, which I think will save us a lot of money and actually will work fine. And I will do my best at what I can do, but please do yours too. Thank you. And I thank you for all the time you do put into, meetings are not my favorite thing. Be well.
My name is Josephine Silva, and I live outside of Willits. I'd like to echo some of the comments from these other Willits folks of the utility of using the Old Howard Hospital. Furthermore, I suspect that right now, within a very short period of time, that a CSU could be established there. There, as I understand it, 4 temporary buildings that aren't temporary because they're on solid foundations that are probably earthquake safe, 1. 2, there is a kitchen there that's available for use, and I'm sure that there's laundry services, and so basically everything's all set up, and it would be very quick to implement any changes that might be needed. And I would suspect that an architectural firm should evaluate that in terms of a time frame when that can happen. The sooner it can happen, the more money that this county can save on sending people outside of county for greater expense. So I do not know if it's a great situation for a puff unit or not, but for a CSU and a crisis residential, it certainly would fit the bill. As far as the city council is concerned, I can't understand why they're not interested in, 27 jobs in a county that's lost a whole lot because of a bypass and other things. So that's their patch to their constituents. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Silva. Any further comments? Yes, please.
My name is Emmy Good, and I live beyond Brook Trail, so I also am in that same situation where even though I own business property in Willits and I also own residential property in Willits, I don't have that chance to really vote or even influence our city council. But I do want you to know that I didn't know too much about what was happening. I was so pleased when Measure B passed. I just thought, this county is really caring about a mental health issue, and I was so pleased. And then I didn't hear anything for a long, long time until a few weeks ago when I saw in the paper that they were going to establish this training unit, and I thought, well, it started. And I was really pleased just to see that at least it was started. But in the meantime, I thought, I need to find out something about this. And so I did get a copy of the Kemper report, I admit I didn't become an authority. I thought, oh, I'm way beyond, this is way over my head. But I did want to just say that I do truly support having Howard Hospital there, not only because of jobs, but I want us to have an identity as a caring community, that we do support mental health services. I don't want people to feel that we're afraid of it. And I actually met with our superintendent of schools, Mark, and he said, the schools aren't worried. I want you to know that. He said, how many hours a day are we in school? How many days a week are we in school? How many days a year are we in school? He said, I feel confident that we can protect our children, that I'm not worried about them. He said, I'm a little more worried about the Trimagants and the homeless people that aren't getting help. And he said, I really want you to know that I do support having it at the Howard Hospital. So I'm just speaking up for you. If you haven't made up your minds yet, I want you to know that there are those of us that really do care, and we haven't really put any pressure on the city council yet because we don't even have much influence. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, John Wetzler, Little River. I just went through my Kemper report and states here that among other stated purposes, Measure B is intended to achieve the following, : a regional behavioral health training facility to be used by behavioral health professionals, public safety, and other first responders. That is in the Kemper report. Thank you.
I'd like to move to Mr. Weird for the auditor's report.
Thank you, Chair Barish. Lloyd Weir, Auditor Controller for the County of Mendocino. I'm going to present the Mental Health Treatment Act Revenue and Expense report today. You all should have a copy of this in your packet. This is the funds that reside outside the general fund of the county in a special revenue fund restricted in its use. The fund is 1224 and the budget unit is 4052. We now have 16 months worth of monthly sales tax revenue proceeds that now total life to date $10,901,042 total dollars. And for this month's report, I have tacked on 2 columns to the right, which now separates out an estimated 25% for operations, services, and treatment, and 75% for facilities. And so you can kind of get an idea of a running total of those splits. And I also want to drop down to expenditures. We now have some current expenditures to add. The most recent would be the First American title cost of the 70% of our training facility. So we now have a life-to-date expenditure of $507,174. And I've also given you a split on those costs. And the current Measure B fund balance, you can see at the bottom, is the difference between the revenues and the expenses plus any interest. As you know, these funds reside in a special revenue fund and earn their own interest. The most recent quarter was over 1.8% earnings. So even though we're not reducing the funding balance, it is making money for the Measure B Treatment Act. So I want to just remind everybody of that. Through June 30th, we've had $69,570 of interest earnings. So currently today, the current Measure B fund balance is $10,463,438. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments from members of the committee? Please, Shannon, please.
Thank you. I have maybe a process question for the auditor, if I may. So after last month's meeting, when the committee approved $35,000 for the sound system, I wondered where in our budget that was going to come from. And also, I want to thank the Board of Supervisors for reallocating those funds. I appreciate that. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I decided to look for the 1920 budget, and then it occurred to me that in my recollection, nor in the agendas or minutes did this committee discuss or approve a 1920 budget. We approved in December of 2019 the fiscal year 18-19 budget. I did find a Measure B budget for fiscal year 1920 in the county's budget, but it's a document that I had never seen before. So there are some line items that I'm not completely certain about, and I wonder if the rest of the committee has questions. So this isn't an agendized item. It is related to the fiscal report, but maybe we could have a discussion on a future agenda about how the budget came about and more detailed description of what some of those items are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Diamond.
Yeah, Lloyd, maybe you could, since you added these two new columns for the first time on the 25% and the 75%, maybe you could just make clear why those are important and what the 25% is and what the 75% represents, so people know what that refers to.
Certainly. That comes directly out of the ballot measure that stated in there that there would be a minimum of 25% of the funds generated from this sales tax attributed to operations, treatment, and service, and that a maximum of up to 75% could be spent for development of facilities and purchase of facilities. So I just took those percentages that were right in the ballot measure and made those two columns for you.
Great.
Thank you.
And just to make clear, the fact that you broke them out for each month doesn't suggest that every month's revenue has to be spent in that 25 to 75% ratio.
No,
Am I correct?
I just did it monthly to
Yeah.
give you a running total. but
Exactly.
It's the total that matters.
Right. Thanks.
Are there any members of the public that would like to comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, 3B, approval of the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes. I'm not going to use that. You can hear me, right?
But it's also for live streaming.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Almond seconds.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Any members of the public like to comment? Moving on to agenda item 3C, discussion and possible action regarding an update on Measure B project manager. Ms. Angelo.
Thank you, Chair Barish. The first round of interviews for the project manager position will occur next week on October 28th, and then there will be a second and final round for those candidates that right now is tentatively scheduled for November 4th. So those are the interviews. We anticipate that we will have a successful process and within the next month be able to announce a new project manager. I also want to say that Mendocino County is in the process of salary increases. This position started at approximately $80,000. Within a 3-year period, this position will be close to $100,000 a year. And then when you add benefits, this position will cost the Measure B committee approximately $150,000 a year. So this is not a position that is a lesser paid position in this county. When you think about approximately $100,000 a year, I think that's a pretty good salary for a project manager. This position is specific to Measure B. This person will only be doing Measure B. Along with that, we will have project management for the construction projects, should there be construction projects. This person is not anticipated to have all the skills of being a contract construction manager as well. So again, there have been comments about the salary. I think for this position, for the level of this position, for the work that is required with this position, approximately $100,000 is the salary. And when you add benefits, you're looking at approximately $150,000 a year. I think that's a pretty good salary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. Any members of the committee like to comment?
Just a quick question. How many applicants do we have for that position?
This is the second round, and we have screened and have 8 candidates scheduled for the second round. I'd like to say the first round we had approximately the same. For each recruitment, we've had 2 recruitments now for this position, and we've had approximately 25 candidates with each recruitment. So clearly there are people out there that think this is a good position, are interested, and also think the salary and benefits are good as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any members of the public like to make comment?
I just wanted to say, I thought I heard.
Please come to the mic.
Oh, sorry. I thought I heard that the position would be.
Please state your name.
I'm sorry. Sherry Ebiam, still. I thought I heard the position salary would be increased to $100,000 within 3 or after 3 years. And my question is about the possibility of starting that. Not necessarily at that big an increase, but start it. My belief is that leadership positions are so important, and if we're willing to pay for good people, we'll get good people.
Thank you.
Hi, Carol Hester. I envisioned this to be like a 3-year contract, not forever and ever and ever out of the Measure B funds. Do y'all have any kind of a beginning and end date, or is this a county position that is then forever embedded into the wherewithal?
Ms. Angelo?
Well, thank you for your question. I really cannot answer that. I will tell you that as a county person, it is not my intention, and I do not believe that this is a forever position. However, with that said, this position is just Measure B. There's no other activities that this particular manager will do except Measure B. When you think about what we're looking at going forward, I don't know if we're looking at developing one service, one facility, 2, 3, I don't know what we're doing, then we have the training center. So when you look at that, 3 years is probably a minimum for this position. And we're probably looking at 5 years. It is not my decision, Ms. Hester. It will be the decision of the committee, I would think, going forward. But I imagine that it is not forever, and that we're probably looking at a minimum of 3 years. And so why that is as important, and I really welcome your question, because we want somebody that has a sense of purpose with Measure B to take this position. If someone is taking this position just for the money, they may not stay, it may not work. We want someone that understands the mission of Measure B and can embrace that mission to help us move our projects forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. Thank you, Ms. Hester. Any other comments from the public?
John Wetzler, Little River. Is there a job description of the project manager's job? Is that in Kemper report or?
No, through the chair. Well, it's not on the county website any longer because it's not posted. Yeah, it was on the county website, and certainly we could post the job description again. as long as we're very clear with the public that this is not an open recruitment right now, but this is the position that we're hiring.
Just informational for the public.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And to any of those 8 candidates who happen to be listening to us today, as they're preparing for their interviews, we saw that the board approved yesterday the $30,000 for the grant writer. And I think a very strong point to in the job description to a project manager would be someone who has worked with grants that maybe we wouldn't even have to spend that $30,000. It would be that project manager that would be able to have knowledge of what grants are out there, because that's half the battle, knowing which grants are out there as well as applying and following through. So if you're listening and you're a job applicant, study up on grants. Thank you.
So Chair Barish, if I could,
please.
I would like to thank the sheriff for that comment, and I think that that's appropriate for where we are. I think that as we go forward, someone that starts in this position right now, it may not actually be 40 hours worth of work, though they're being hired full-time. I think eventually it will be. We would anticipate that this project manager would work with the mental health department, specifically with Dr. Miller, as far as looking at those grants, accessing and writing. Even though Measure B has already allocated the $30,000, as you've stated, possibly we will get someone who has some grant writing skills. So thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. Any further comments from the public?
Josephine Silva. I was curious whether this person is also in charge of the actual treatment that might go on in any way. Thank you.
Ms. Angelo has indicated that the person will not be.
This really is, if you look at the job description, while it's a fairly robust job description, it is a very narrow focus. This project manager is just Measure B. They're to support this committee. They are to support the projects under Measure B and under the funding. Yes, they should be and will be responsible for managing the budget and monitoring the budget. They will report out once a month to this committee as to what the progress is. We will look to this person to work with the others that will be working on the projects to assure that we stay on time and on budget. They will report to this committee if we are not on time and on budget, and they will also be a liaison to the Board of Supervisors. So just as they will come to this meeting once a month and participate and report out, they will also be expected to do the report out to the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you.
In short, they won't be shrinking any heads. It's a joke.
Sorry, I guess I don't understand the joke.
Shrinking any heads, they're not gonna be involved in treatment directly.
My limited knowledge.
That shrinks,
I get it, I
yeah.
get it.
Don't worry about it.
Thank you for explaining that to me. I hope everybody heard that.
Thank you, Dr.
Moving on to agenda item 3D, discussion and possible action regarding update on the status of the architect RFQ and related feasibility study. Ms. Rao.
Good afternoon, Janelle Rao, Deputy CEO. Just a quick update. The evaluation committee has been meeting as we last reported. We have been engaging in negotiations and have what we would consider a draft scope of work. The evaluation committee is actually meeting this afternoon at the conclusion of this particular meeting to really get a better sense of where we're headed with this. It's anticipated that the actual contract itself will be presented to the Board of Supervisors on their November 12th meeting here in Ukiah. Not much more to say other than that because we have not concluded those negotiations. It is still an open, competitive process.
Thank you very much.
Chair Barish,
Please,
just one
Mr.
comment,
Angelo.
and thank you to Deputy CEO Janelle Rao. I want to be certain that this committee is aware of this, but I'm not certain that the public is, that members of this committee have and will continue to sit on the interview panels, and members of this committee also sit on the RFP committee as well to assist with making the decision around the architect contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on the committee?
I have one. So November 12th, it's going in front of the Board of Supervisors, and we as our committee, we're not meeting until the 27th, 25th of November.
Correct.
At what point will we have an opportunity to review what the Board of Supervisors, will it be after the Board of Supervisors votes on it?
Yes, we took direction from the board to conduct the RFP.
Okay,
The contract recommendation would be coming from the purchasing agent, which is Ms. Angelo, to the board who directed the RFP. Correct.
thank you.
You got it.
Chair Barish, I'm sorry, I just want to make one comment, which is one of the reasons why it was so important to have members of the Measure B committee on the RFP committee, so that the members participate and certainly have a voice in the discussion and the choosing of the architect.
So help my memory, is who from our committees on that ad hoc?
I'm going to have Deputy CEO help with that, because my memory is as well as yours. Thank you.
Miss Angela was just on a pilgrimage. We have Miss Miller, who's sitting on it. Mark Myrtle is sitting on the committee. Jed is also sitting on the committee. I believe. And Jan. I'm sorry, Jan. I'm so sorry. And Donna was also on the committee. We had actually quite a few of the Measure B. And what, just procedurally to explain, what we had done is the entire committee met and reviewed the written proposals, narrowed it down, conducted oral presentations, conducted follow-up oral presentations with a smaller group of those evaluators that are now coming back to the whole committee to review those findings.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further members of the committee like to comment? Members of the public, any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, I'd like, oh, please, Mr. Silva.
Josephine Silva. I'm not quite sure what's in this description for these architects, but I'm wondering if it includes a timeline of how long each of the feasibility for each of the possibilities, how long that would take. In other words, will it take 2 years to complete, 3 years, 4 years? I know Sheriff Almonds has a facility that's been in the works for a while, and it hasn't been completed yet, and it takes a while. So it impacts part of the decision as to whether or not to use Howard Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Silva. Mr. Haschak.
Thank you. John Haschak, 3rd District Supervisor. And first of all, I'd like to thank the committee for all your work on this. You know, it's been a long haul so far. And I think that we're reaching a point right now where we're starting to see the real seeds of that work coming to fruition. We see that we have a training center, and with the $50,000 we just put in that we approved, that hopefully we can get that working very shortly. And then with the project manager and the architect RFQ, and with those in place, that's what we needed to get everything moving in this whole process. And so I think that the public should be thanking the committee for where we are, and hopefully this is a springboard for the real construction and the work that will provide the facilities and the treatment that our communities need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haschak. Any further comment from the members of the public? Seeing none, I'd like to move on to agenda item 3E, discussion and possible action regarding report from the Kemper Report Ad Hoc Committee provided by Ms. McGordy.
So Donna and I met because, as you know, county people are very busy. And we made 2 recommendations. We briefly reviewed Kemper's proposed strategic planning financing plan, because we don't talk about services in our ad hoc committee. And we thought that the suggested budget that Mr. Kemper came up with would need a more detailed study by our committee since year 1 is passed. In the meantime, we came up with 2 recommendations that we sent by our fellow committee members who didn't complain, so I'm assuming they approved. And there were 2. The first one was to maintain a prudent reserve of Measure B funds, which he had suggested. We suggested 15%. And the way we came up with this amount was that the California governor sets aside 12.5. MHSA requires 33%, which is a third of the budget that you can't spend. And Kemper suggested 20%. So based upon Donna's historically banker-friendly advice, we thought 15% was a good compromise. And then the second one was that this prudent reserve have a separate item on the budget. So like was presented in our financial report this month, where you have 2 columns, we suggest that there be 3 columns. And that the prudent reserve would be 15% of the total, which left 63.75% of facilities and 21.25% for services. And that, considering there's been money spent already, that the previously spent money should be divided equally between the 3 accounts. Those were our recommendations that we present to this board for approval to move on to the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGordy. So, is there a motion to approve the ad hoc committee to send a recommendation for 15% prudent
I had a
reserve?
question before we get into.
Certainly, yeah.
May I?
Please.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand, Jan, what a prudent reserve in the way that you're talking about it entails. Would that be money that would never be spent because it would always be there for something? Or do you have a specification on under what circumstances you would use the money that's in the prudent reserves part of the funds?
So do we have a budget person that can speak to prudent reserves?
It's your job.
I'd be glad to.
Mr. Weir?
So Lloyd Weir, Auditor Controller. We can set up a reserve in any fund in the county. That is a process that the Board of Supervisors would approve during the budget process and the close of the year. Normally during the year, a transaction like that does not occur because it can only happen at the beginning or the end of the budget cycle. So if we're going to go down that road, number one, we'll need to wait until the end of the year to make an entry to create a reserve, a prudent reserve. And all that does is, if you refer back to my financial report, it would take the money out of the $10 million that we have in fund balance and move it into a separate account, which would be called reserves. So, you know, since it's a restricted fund anyway, nothing's going to happen to the $10 million staying where it is. But if you want to formally make a motion to move it, that would be something the board would have to approve at year end and be recommended to do.
So, just so I understand, is if we take money out of the the budget that we have to spend on facilities or programs and we take it out of that and put it into a reserve. I'm trying to get into my mind, I mean, it sounds nice to have a reserve against, we all have savings accounts or something, money under the pillow for a rainy day kind of thing. But it seems like part of using that well would be to have an idea of when do you go into it? Or do you ever? Or is it a forever reserve that will be there in case of, I don't know what? But who decides that, and how do we decide it?
Again, that's a board decision, and it's.
The board, our board?
It's the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Decides and has to vote on that formally at the budget process.
But we're today going to potentially vote on whether we recommend a prudent reserve, aren't we? Jan? So I want to understand what I'd be voting on is what I'm asking.
I think when I read the Kemper report, it looks like he wanted to establish the prudent reserve for future years after the 5-year sunset. So he wanted to hang on to it and have it for the years when we drop down from a half cent to 1/8 cent. So that was the Kemper plan.
Okay.
I don't know what our Board of Supervisors would want to use that reserve for. So it's.
Sheriff Allman.
And Ms. Angelo can comment on that, but I believe that the way that the Board of Supervisors has their reserve set up is it requires a supermajority, 4/5 of the board,
Correct.
to get money out of the general reserves and to expend it. And that, if we're going to have such a motion today, we need to think about what rules we're going to follow. My suggestion would be put this on next month's agenda so we can all get a list of what the rules are for general reserve, the money removal. I know that Member Riley has asked in the past, and is a very good point of, on the buildings that we're going to build or buildings that we're going to use, if it was Howard Hospital, can you imagine the cost of putting a new roof on that hospital? And it's going to be a lot of money, and roofs last 25, 30 years, and this building that we're sitting in right now is having a new roof put on. It's $1.5 million. It's certainly up there. So my suggestion, before we get to the motion in a second and so forth, is that we discuss the possibility of putting us in next month's agenda and allowing us to understand the good and the bad of putting money in the general reserve. Thank you.
Ms. McGordy, is that your pen up, or that's yours? Okay, sorry. Please, go ahead, Mark.
Yep. So, I think voting on a reserve which would restrict approximately $7.5–8 million of money before we've decided what we're doing is not a good idea. I would like to have all the money available to make decisions based on what we decide to move forward with, CRT, CSU, PUF units. So that's my comment.
Okay.
So I wanted to give an example of, Jan did mention MHSA has a reserve. So Mental Health Services Act, we do have a reserve. The state has set the max limit that the county can have a reserve. The reason for the reserves is because it's a tax incentive, right? So it's a 1% on the millionaire's tax that we get. If we have an economy takes the tank and we're going to a deficit, what we're bringing in that 1% MHSA dollars, we take a hit. We can no longer fund programs at the rate we were funding them if we don't have a reserve. So that's part of that process. If we implement programs and then you don't have a reserve and your tax dollars, what you project to come in, are less than what they come in at, how do you then look at that and fund those services? So I think it is imprudent to have a reserve. We've seen it in MHSA. We do have a process when we look at the Mental Health Services Act. If we need to use our prudent reserve, it's a stakeholder process where we have to publicly let the stakeholders know, which is the community, know that we are going to need to use these reserves, what they will be used for, and why we're using them. So that's just a process as an example.
I think one other thing we could look at when we talk about the 15% reserve is maybe we look at it for the monies that would be set aside for services. Maybe it's not so much on the facility dollars until we know what we're building for facilities, but at least from the services side, maybe we should look at it as at least we have a prudent reserve on that side.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo.
Oh, I deferred to yours.
So I would like to just speak to process. And the process that could occur with this committee, should the committee decide to move forward with a reserve. This is not a general reserve. This is not, goes into general reserve, Lloyd has it, the board has authority over it. While all reserve, all money, every dollar is the board's money. However, how this would work would be, my suggestion would be that the ad hoc is making a recommendation to this committee for a reserve. What you could do if you entertain the idea of developing a reserve is that you could ask the ad hoc to develop a policy, and then that policy could be reviewed by our auditor to make sure it goes within the county policies. And then that policy could come to this committee to make a decision as to how you feel about that policy. It is true what the sheriff said, it's a 4/5 vote, that cannot change. But you could have something in there, you could set the parameters as to, one, how much money, if it's 15%, if you do it on all of the money or just services, and then also what it would take to take that money out of reserve. I also want to say that over the past 13 years, Mendocino County has developed a $12 million general reserve. That was not an easy thing to do when we started. Certainly when I started in 2007, our reserve was about $1.9 million a year, and the auditor could attest to this. We used it every year. We have, over the last 13 years, saved some money. We did that not because we wanted this nice pile of money sitting there. We did that because we never want to ask our staff to take a pay cut again. I think that having a downturn, probably before this building, if we build a building, is even built, could happen. But if we have a downturn going forward, there's nothing that says general fund would be available to cover the costs if there's no Measure B tax dollars. So I would concur with Dr. Miller in the importance of a reserve. And I can't imagine that we would go forward with Measure B without developing a reserve, whether we did that today, next month, or next year. I mean, I'm certain that the city has a reserve, the county has a reserve. Why we would do this with Measure B and not have any money sitting there to cover costs that would be unexpected would be something that would really surprise me if this committee wasn't willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. Ms. Muschetti?
I would like to ask a question first. When would we have to have this to the Board of Supervisors in order for their next budget?
You want to take this one?
I would say January or February, because starting in January, we will have at a minimum 3 budget workshops with the board. And so they will be making decisions and giving direction so that in June, the second week in June, we would do our budget hearings. So January, February, March at the very latest, this should go to the board.
So we have time. I would like to ask my committee members, which are all sitting over there by themselves, if we table this until next month and get more information and convince everybody that we need this prudent reserve. And explain why, and have it.
Do you want to include a policy, some kind of
Absolutely.
policy so it makes clear?
I'm all about policy and procedure, you know that.
Yeah. Okay, so then do we need a motion to table it, or just?
Nope, you just, we're withdrawing it and tabling
direction that that's what we're doing. We have it, okay.
We're a standing committee, so.
Could I ask for clarification? Is this a standing committee or an ad hoc? Ad hoc? Okay.
Sorry, my bad. That's all right.
Any further comment from the committee?
I have one more. So for me, I think a reserve is an important idea, and we should have one. My only concern is how, if we need it, how easy is it to get it? And I didn't quite understand, does it require 4 votes on the supervisor? I didn't quite get what the requirement is to use the money. If we as a committee say, we'd like to use this money for something that we think is important, how do we do that?
Chair,
Ms. Angela.
can I answer? Okay, thank you. Yes, it's a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors in order to take money out of a reserve. So that would hold because that is a county policy, that's a county fiscal policy. But again, while the board has the authority to spend or not spend the money, as this committee knows, the board will not approve anything that has to do with Measure B dollars unless this Measure B committee brings something forward. So what will be important is that the ad hoc committee actually develops a policy that's inclusive of what all these members want. And if you set the parameters as to when this money could be touched, and that process requires that there be a Measure B committee meeting, or at least some type of Measure B meeting in order for that money to be touched, then the recommendation goes to the board. If Measure B did not have the money to move forward on whatever, and we needed to touch the money from the reserve, I doubt that it would happen in a 24-hour period. So there would be enough time to put it on the agenda, bring it to Measure B, and then bring it to the Board of Supervisors. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
I think so. I mean, right now, do I understand right? If we made a recommendation on anything to the Board of Supervisors and they voted on it, it could get passed on a 3-2 vote. Is that true?
Yes, except touching the reserve. And that's-
Exactly.
yeah.
So that's a more stringent, once the money goes into that, it's a more stringent getting it out of there,
We can't take it out because we're $100,000 short on wallpaper.
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand now.
And just to remind this committee, remember way back when we got another claim from the Kemper group for approximately $27,000, and due to timing, I brought that to the board. Remember, the board would not approve that without first getting a recommendation from the Measure B committee. So whether you're talking reserve, whether you're talking using any money, this Board of Supervisors will not touch that money unless there's some recommendation from this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. Any further comment from the board? Seeing none, would any of the public like to make a comment, please?
Hi, I'm Sherry Ebiam. A way to look at a prudent reserve is, in my past practice, it was always based on the budget for the current year. And the prudent reserve was, in particular, was based on the budgeted expenses. It had nothing to do with the revenues, but with the expenses. And so when I heard discussion of 15% of a projected $38 million, that's $5.2 million set aside. That's a massive amount. But if as the money is spent in Measure B, the amount of money that will be budgeted for expenses will go down. And so the amount of money that's needed for a reserve will also go down. So they play off of each other, but they're essentially, that reserve is based off of the budget, and in particular, the expenses of the budget. That's, in my experience, that's how the prudent reserves that I worked with were set up.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Haschak, 3rd District Supervisor. And when I look at this, it seems like we're talking about creating 3 accounts. But when you really think about the whole big picture of it, we've got this one account for facilities, one for services, and then if you're taking 15% in reserve, you need to create 2 extra buckets. One reserve for facilities and one for services. Otherwise, they get commingled, and then you have a problem because you're spinning out of that reserve bucket. But that's for the accounting people to figure out. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comment, I would like to move on to member reports regarding general involvement since the last meeting. Ms. Miller, Dr. Miller?
So just quickly, what I've been sort of working on is I started having my staff pull the grants. We look at grants anyways, but we're now doing a different look at grants. This was even before the board approved that process. We went ahead and started pulling all grants that come in our way to not only look for them for what we're doing in mental health, but also what if they could be beneficial to Measure B. So I wanted to let you guys, we have put that process in place. And also I've been working with the CHAFA board. As you know, we have that $500,000 grant that can go towards a crisis residential treatment. And so definitely working with that board so that we are able to keep those grant dollars and be able to have them available for crisis residential treatment.
Thank you, Ms. McGordy.
Thank you. So I have a couple things I want to share. So this week, Janine and I did a conference call with the director of the Crisis Assessment Center in Memphis that I think I mentioned last time. So that was very interesting. Follow-up to the visit that we did to the Crisis Stabilization Unit in Nevada County. Also, the Behavioral Health Board members are busy doing a survey of the different clinics in the county. The clinics generally serve mild to moderate mental illness. And so one of the questions is what are the gaps and what are the barriers? So I'm hoping that when we complete interviewing all of the clinics, we can have an assessment and of what the conceived gaps are that would provide information on what services might be needed. And finally, I just wanted to mention that the Behavioral Health Advisory Board's December meeting falls on December 18th, which is the same meeting, the same date that this meeting is scheduled for, because you moved it up for the Christmas holidays. So I was wondering if you wanted to consider on the next agenda, if we cut our meeting short, then Measure B could meet either at that venue or have a joint meeting. We're scheduled to meet at the community center in Willits, which I understand is big enough to house a lot of people. Is that correct? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Angela.
Thank you, Chair Barish. My comment has to do with meetings as well going forward, that our next meeting is scheduled, next Measure B committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, November 27th, which is the day before the Thanksgiving holiday. And within our county system, we do allow our staff to take their own personal time and leave that Wednesday afternoon. So there are many offices that do close that Wednesday before Thanksgiving at approximately 1 o'clock. So I would like to suggest that we change the date for this meeting because I'm not certain that we will have staff support. So we could change it to Wednesday, November 20th or November 20th? I have it November 27th. Am I way off?
No. The Behavioral Health Board
Is the 20th? Okay, my point is that meeting on November 27th may be impossible. So I don't know what you would like to do. Either we go dark or we get another date.
Does this?
Was it changed? Was I like, am I way out there? Have I missed the whole thing? Okay, all right.
It's on the calendar for the 27th.
Okay,
It's scheduled for the 27th.
okay. So I don't think we could have the meeting on November 27th. So I don't know what this committee would like to do.
Would you like to make a motion?
My motion would be that we cancel the Measure B committee meeting that is scheduled for Wednesday, November 27th, and if possible, we reschedule it for another date in November. Or if this committee chooses, we go dark in November and our next meeting is in December.
Well, the fourth Wednesday of December is Christmas. So if we're gonna make a motion, we need to make a consolidated motion to prepare for this. And personally, on the 20th, I'm not available, I'm out of state. My recommendation, and certainly everybody's looking at their calendars now, is to possibly combine the November-December meeting into one meeting. That would be after Thanksgiving and before Christmas, that we would be able to have a productive meeting. And I just want to say this, and this is a packed house. 3 years ago, if there was a meeting on mental health, you could have heard crickets. Because people wouldn't attend meetings. And my personal goal is to get marijuana off the front page and put mental health on the front page. And I really appreciate exactly why you're here. So we're trying to accommodate you, with the sound system and with meetings and so forth, so we can continue the conversation about mental health and hopefully get to a resolution. So I respect your motion, Ms. Angelo, but I think if we could combine the two, it would work.
That's fine. I could certainly change my motion. We didn't have a second on it anyway, so. But again, if there's a discussion from this committee. So if we were looking at changing the scheduled November date and the scheduled December date, then we can do one of two things. We could either have Cass send something out to the committee and we can schedule the meeting within the next couple weeks, actually pick the date, or we can decide right now, which may or may not work for the committee members, which day in December. So if that was, Jan, you talked about December 18th. Is that, am I way off? Were you talking about November? Okay. The Behavioral Health Board meets on December 18th.
In Willits.
December or November?
So if we were looking at delaying, rescheduling November and December, do we want to look at something earlier in December? Do we want to look at December 4th? I'm not available, but I'm only one person. So December 11th, December 18th.
The 18th is when we're planned to meet. Is that my understanding? That's
Yes, yes.
We've already agreed on December 18th as our December date?
You do have that, yeah. Okay, so then we just don't have a meeting in November.
Well, so just so I'm clear, if our regular date is December 18th, that date doesn't conflict with anything, is that correct, other than the behavioral health meeting? And you're suggesting maybe we meet there so that we add,
Yeah, it would
you could go to both.
conflict as far as venue
Yeah.
is concerned.
And
it would conflict with shortening our meeting.
Okay. And in terms of the November meeting, it sounds like there's a number of people on this committee that can't be there, and staff support for this meeting. True? So, and if I understand right, one of the agenda items that I think is of interest to all of us and the community is that we may know who the project manager is by then? Didn't you say that?
In December?
Yeah. And we don't know about the architectural decision yet as to when
This
that
will go to
might-
the board. The architect item will go to the board on November 12th. So
Okay.
that will be public the Thursday before. So by November 7th, this committee will know.
Okay.
And then November 12th, the board will make a decision.
Okay.
So with
All right.
all of that said, what would you like to do?
Would, Sheriff Allman?
I apologize that this, what I'm going to say conflicts with behavioral health, but maybe January would work for behavioral health or so forth. We're trying to combine meetings and it's just not going to work. I'm out of town out of town on the 11th. I'm actually going to make a motion that we consolidate November meeting to the December meeting on December 18th, which is already on the calendar. And so we would just go with our next meeting after today would be December 18th.
Are you making that as a motion, Sheriff?
motion.
Then I would second that motion. Thank you.
So I'm just asking that it could be moved to Willits so that we could have our meeting in the morning and then Measure B could meet in the afternoon. And with our lovely sound system, it shouldn't matter where we are, right? And we have all these people from Willits. It seems like the perfect idea.
Any further comments about location?
The only thing I would ask is there a charge for that location? Does the Behavioral Health Board get that location for free? So then the Measure B committee would get that location without a charge as well?
We have it for the whole day. We'll share.
So I will revamp my motion to say, let's consolidate 2 months and meet on December 18th. And our meeting place in December will be in Willits. My motion is to be in Willits at the community center with no charge to the Measure B committee.
And I still second that motion. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Carol Hester, just need an address for the community center. I have no clue where that is.
City Hall.
Oh, City Hall?
So all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. The next meeting is at the community center on the 18th of December. Moving on with items of interest, Mr. Weir, anything to report since the last meeting?
Thank you, Chair Barish. Nothing to report.
I have nothing to report.
I would like to mention that we need to schedule next year's meeting schedule. So to get that placed on the agenda for next meeting. Also, I'd like to mention, it's been brought to my attention that there's people from the coast that would like to attend, and it's difficult for them to attend. So I'd like to have at least one meeting in Fort Bragg if possible. I can arrange the town hall. So is that up to me to select that, or is that something? Okay. So I'd like to, put that as a consideration in the schedule. And I won't be here for December 18th meeting. I'll be out of town.
I have nothing to report.
A couple things, and for the agenda, I think what we agreed upon is that there will be a continuous item on the progress of the training center on each month. If we could make sure that's on this month it would have been 3F, but there is an ad hoc on the training center, and Dr. Miller and I have had an opportunity to talk, and we've met out there and we've gone through several things, and as was reported by Supervisor McCowan, the board approved the initial $50,000, and it's certainly not a country club, and Bill's a friend of mine. It's not a country club. It's a former Jehovah's Witness church, and training is very essential to the whole gamut of improving mental health services throughout Mendocino County for first responders, for nurses, for teachers, for parents, for mental health professionals. The theater seats that if you toured the church have been removed, and there's probably over 500 bolts coming out of the floor that they were attached to that they'll be removed to, and the carpet will come out because the carpet has 500 holes in it. So the initial $50,000 is going to involve planning of getting to this board, hopefully a very decent drawing in December of showing you where we're going on it, some basic equipment that we need, such as there will be a very secure gun locker outside, because as a training facility that's going to have first responders in there, we're going to have a absolute do not break rule that there will be no guns inside the training facility, because there are going to be scenario-based training exercises going on. So some basic equipment, some audio equipment, and some wiring is going to be happening that hopefully when we meet on December 18th, you're going to be able to hear some very good productivity, with my goal of, and I don't know if we can do it, but my goal is at the end of January, having it ready for training and possibly some meetings. And so we're moving fast and furiously on that. And we have been officially, as I told you last month, but it's officially in writing, we've been accepted by the state to receive a very expensive piece of equipment for simulated training of not using lethal force. And so it is expected that equipment is going to be installed at no cost to us by the end of January by the state. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Damon.
Yeah, I want to just echo the sheriff's appreciation for people coming to these meetings from the community. I've been working in mental health services of various kinds for, it's hard to believe, but 50 years now. And it's often been either silent or so contentious people are yelling and screaming at each other. And I really appreciate both the willingness for the community to spend your time. I know it's not easy to come and sit in meetings. I don't like to sit in meetings either, but it's important, and we do listen, and I've appreciated the opportunity to meet with people in my district that I represent, which includes Willits, at community meetings, and to hear everybody, even when there are disagreements, that we listen to each other and often find some common ground for supporting what we all, I think, agree on, which is that the community, when we come together, not only can we raise a significant amount of money, which we hear every month, what a tiny little bit of tax from everybody can bring in $700,000 a month to our community. And then together, hopefully, we can think and plan and act on how do we spend that money really effectively and well. So thank you all.
That brings us to an end of a meeting. I would like to adjourn. Thank you.